Welcome to Conversations with CSG, the global talent podcast from CSG Talent. We interview influential figures across a wide range of innovative and impactful industry sectors worldwide, discussing career journeys, overcoming challenge, achieving success, diversity, and much more. I'm sure you'll see value in a lot of the topics we cover. So here it is. Hope you enjoy.
Well, good morning, Jeff. Welcome to Conversations with CSG. We've invited you here today to offer a perspective on manufacturing, operations and the wider materials handling industry. And for those in the audience who might not be familiar with you, your most recent role was the Chief Operations Officer at Clark Materials Handlings, but your career history has been working within high-stakes leadership positions across a variety of industries, from building products to medical devices. And with the wealth of leadership experience that you've developed spanning decades across supply chain, manufacturing, distribution, how have you built high-performing teams and what have been your core focuses when doing that?
I'd say, at least from my perspective, I describe it as leading with passion, right? So passionate about people, passionate about business, passionate about having success. So I try to foster that same kind of mindset, with the teams that I build. So, it's my opinion that I think most people want to come to work, right? And they want to have a place where they can contribute and make a difference in the company. And so, as a leader, you've got to kind of foster that, environment for the employees. So I think that's where I put a lot of my focus. I think with employees is also understanding that they want to win. I think that's really, really important. I want to win too. So, I always figure it's best to do that together. I try to establish, priorities, set the expectation. And then I think roll up my sleeves and work next to them to help them achieve that, right? So I think those are, critical kind of building blocks for building a good team. And I always think the measurement for a leader's success is, are you having a lot of turnover? Because if you're having a lot of turnover, it's probably not a process issue. It's probably a leadership issue, right? And then I think the other piece to think about is, how do your employees feel on Sunday nights? I think that's important. They're looking forward to, coming to work and contributing and being part of the team, as opposed to, they not enthusiastic about coming to work. They're just, punching the clock and they're not adding value. So I think, those are things that you have to consider, from a leadership perspective. And those are things that I take serious.
That is very insightful about how people feel on a Sunday evening before they're coming to work on Monday. And that'll change. You can be happy in a role in January, and by the time July comes around, you can be dreading going in on Monday morning. How is it
Absolutely.
you identify those individuals and get them back on the bus and moving in the right direction?
Yeah, well, I try not to let it get there, right? I mean, I think that's part of it. You've got to work as a leader to understand and engage with employees more often than not, right? And I try to take the time, at least from this is something I do, right? My perspective is I try to make time to get out and understand what's happening in the workplace, right? What's happening in the business, whether it's going out on a production floor or going out and seeing, service technicians or whatever the case may be. It's spending time out there and trying to understand what are the things that they find challenging for their job, or what are the things that are missing. I find it valuable from my perspective, and having worked in a lot of different environments, is roundtables with employees where it's open. There's an opportunity to ask them questions and for them to give you feedback, and then taking that and and creating some actionable items that you can make changes to in the culture.
Yeah, so really fostering an environment of engagement with the employees and making sure that everyone's heard. And I can imagine that that's particularly difficult in periods of change, especially when you're going through restructuring or organizational changes, or even just challenges in the market. How do you weigh the fears of people about change within an organization against the need to actually make progress and move the business forward?
No, I don't think I've ever met an employee who didn't want to help you solve a problem. Right. I never have. And if I have, then they, but I think that, they want to be part of the problem solving, right? They want to help you get involved and figure out a solution for things. I've never had an employee say, I don't want to do that. So, I think making sure that, and this is really kind of a personal thing for me, but I would rather roll up my sleeves next to them and focus on the problem and be transparent about what the issues are and the challenges and what are the roadblocks, and get their ideas and collaborate on how we overcome them, right? As a team, right? As a team. Um, so I think that's mostly, I think, the fear is that people have to have confidence in the leadership. I think that's critical, right? If people don't have confidence in the leadership of the business or the direction of the business, you'll start having people fall out because people won't be as engaged and they won't be as willing to work through problems with you, right? So it's a lot of coaching, I think, that takes place there, especially in that period of when you're transitioning or something's changing. I think that's when it's most needed, that where that focus to sit down, collaborate more often, I think is critical.
Yeah. And across the industries that you've worked in, and particularly within the materials handling industry, what sort of changes have you seen take place, and what's been the impact of those, both on yourself, the employees, and the overall industry?
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing for me, I think it's two elements to it. I think one is the material handling space. I think industrial equipment in general has been very traditional. It's been a very traditional environment, right? So a lot of private ownership, a lot of, dealers are started by families. And so a lot of more family oriented entrepreneurial type of approach, right? For a lot of it. I think you've got your big players, right? You've got the big names that sit out there, and they operate on a different level, right? They're very business management focused, but a large part of it has been very traditional focused. And one of the biggest things that I see changing is the influx of private equity. So consolidation, for the most part, this industry has not been touched by private equity, right? And what does that mean? And so what it's doing is private equity gives those smaller dealers or the smaller OEMs an opportunity to have more capital to invest and consolidate and drive change, within their markets. I think that's a big change. I think the other thing to consider, and I call it kind of two buckets, right? It's really like the business end of it, what we're seeing, and then the other side of it is people, right? Is back in my day when my hair wasn't as gray, well, there was a time when people loved working Saturdays, right? And they wanted as much overtime as possible. And so I think, the COVID kind of post-COVID era of this, buzzword of, work-life balance is changing the game a bit, right? But it's the reality that the younger group, the workforce, is more transient, and so you've got to take those two kind of those two buckets and really evaluate, what's your business model going forward. And so those are the two most significant. I'll add just a little bit more to that. We've spent the last 25, let's say 30 years being a outsourcing country, right? So we've spent a lot of time outsourcing our manufacturing processes. And so now our supply chain is very deep, right? And so when you do that, it doesn't allow you to be very agile, right? As a business, right? So you have to have, there's long lead times to parts and things like that, and raw materials that you need to get. So we've kind of turned into this planning, PSYOP, S&OP kind of country, right? That's what we're mostly familiar with. And so, we're managing distribution centers, we're managing inventories, we're managing planning and master production schedules for somebody else that's going to provide us a product, right? And so those things have changed the industry a lot. And what you do is you find out that dealers or OEMs are sitting on a weird mix of product, right? Can they sell what they have in their inventory? And a lot of times they can't, right? It's something that, is a challenge for everybody, right? So now you're trying to manage, how do I scrap or have aging product in an inventory in a warehouse somewhere that I've got to find a way to offload at a discount. And so a lot of different challenges that have been out there, kind of driving our industry in the US for, some time now.
And two things there that probably did have an impact on supply chain as well. How much did the COVID pandemic compared to potentially the tariffs have an impact on how organizations have been orienting their supply chains? Because I know that
Sure.
everyone had a lot of issues getting product into the market during COVID as well.
Yeah, there was a really strange period where the shipping container costs went through the roof and became really challenging. I think it created a lot of angst on companies to make sure that they had enough product, right? Because, like every other company, you're focused on customer service level. So you want to make sure that you've got a lot of inventory to be able to fulfill the customer demand. And so, I think everybody, I don't think any industry was not affected by it, but you get nervous. And so you generally tend to overload your inventories quite a bit. Right. And so that was a really challenging period, but I think we're very stuck, right? We're not very agile. Like I said before, I think that's really challenging for our work environment. I think what the tariff is doing is it's changing a mindset, right? And I feel like it's an opportunity to kind of come back and look at what can we do here. We've been so focused on the planning, inventory, material side of the business. What does it mean to go back and have some balance or some mix of products or raw materials or finished goods that we could source in the U.S. or maybe onshore it or near shore it, at least to wherever your customer base is, right? Or wherever your manufacturing is. That creates a lot more agility in your process. It improves quality, right? So quality, delivery, I think all of those things, there's a lot of upside for those particular sides of the business. And you're not worried about planning so far out. There's things that you get from other countries like frames, and frames aren't small, right? So, they have to be manufactured. You're essentially shipping air, on those frames, and then you have limited amounts that can get on one container. So the cost is very high and it's hard to pivot, right? So you can't pivot if a customer doesn't want one particular model, you need to make another one. You already have POs that have been out for 6 months trying to get frames, right? So once again, it goes back to being a little more agile for the customer. There is an opportunity to say that you need less inventory too, right? So if you need less inventory because you can react faster too. So there's, I think, some upside to it.
Yeah, and speaking on the tariffs and the challenges associated with managing that change in policy and the change in mindset across the countries, when I'm speaking to OEMs, a lot of people are thinking about bringing their operations onshore or increasing their onshore operations within the United States. Do you think that's how organizations should be navigating this and scaling back their global operations, or where do you sit on that?
I think it's not really about scaling back. It's about changing the mindset of how you do business, right? For me, it's an opportunity. I see it as being able to leverage what you can. I think mix is going to be really important, right? So you have to have a mix of material, raw material and componentry that you're buying. I think you've got to have a mix of that. I've done a pretty intense study on what it would take to bring back some uh, industrial manufacturing back to the U.S. And it can be done, and it can be done profitably, right? So if you look at it from that perspective, the tariff is kind of leveled the playing field a bit. You have to be creative and where you go to get your raw materials, your componentry from, and the mix has to make sense. So really analyzing your bill of materials and walking through that process and seeing what that mix is, I think will lead you down the path of having better customer service levels, right? And I think that's critical. It's really hard it's very expensive and very hard to next day air, especially larger components from, let's say Asia or Europe or something like that. So if you're able to have some of those larger componentry or those more expensive type items closer to home and not have to carry the burden of the inventory necessarily, it helps, right? And it helps to be able to react to the customer, quicker.
And from a talent perspective, well, with the capability of profitably onshoring manufacturing operations, but the trend has been for years to offshore much of it. Do you think that there's, the right people within the US market or a sufficient amount of people within the US market who can run these operations profitably and successfully when it's been sent abroad for so long?
Honestly, no, not necessarily, right? I mean, it's the age-old question, and what are we going to do? I think that really is. I think you have a lot of companies I think that are sitting out there right now, and so what's going to be the strategy going forward? The one thing that everybody talks about is that we need to train we need to train employees better, right, and quicker, and get them up to speed in a shorter period of time. The challenge, the question that follows that is that employee going to stay, right? So you have a large investment where you're going to come into, let's say you create an internal learning management system for internal process, right? That's probably the best way to go about this. The other question becomes, how do you retain employees, right? Or are you just training employees for somebody else, right? And so I think it's a two-part thing. I think one, traditional HR has to change, right? There has to be a people strategy around, how do we get people up to speed faster? And then there's a leadership issue that says, how do we hold on to them, right? Do we have the right culture? Are we doing the necessary things? I'll use this reference. I don't think it's about pizza parties and celebrating people's birthdays, right? It's about creating a culture that is, I think, engaged with the employee. It's creating a good culture of problem solving, collaboration, good work-life balance, those kinds of things. It's been my experience, at least, that I've been able to retain employees, throughout my tenure at companies, and I'm not used to people leaving. And so if you do see people leaving your organization, it's something else, right? Something, it's generally about culture, about leadership, or something's wrong, right? And so it kind of goes back to the thing I said before. So I think leadership and ownership have to figure out, do they have the right mix to keep these people, at their companies and engaged? And I think that's incredibly important, right?
Yeah. And the experience of the employee related to the culture of a business usually
Mhm.
permeates out to how they treat the customer, and customer experience impacts your revenue, brand loyalty, overall reputation. How can businesses enhance how they're treating the customer to remain competitive in a market that's always changing?
Yeah, I think it's everything, right? I mean, I really do. We all talk about the customer experience. I think it really is true, right? Because I've sat on both sides of it. I've sat on the OEM dealer and dealership side, right? I've worked in both of those environments, and I've also worked on the customer end of it, right? And I will have to say that I'm a pretty tough customer. I think what's happening is that the people entering the market, and I'm going to go back to my private equity thing just for a moment. I had an opportunity while I was at Clark, I had an opportunity to meet some of these, private equity groups that are coming in and consolidating a lot of the dealerships, right? And the people that they're bringing on into these roles are really sharp young guys that are coming into this industry, right? And they're college educated and they're aggressive, and it's a different mindset, right? So, the old Rolodex, and I'll start aging myself here, but there's no Rolodex anymore, right? With that guys, you've known for 30 years, is if you can call him up and work things out, right? I think that old traditional mindset is going away, rather quickly. So, you've got these younger guys coming in. I think they're being a little bit more aggressive. Private equity is going to be more aggressive, right? Because private equity is about velocity, and how fast you can move. And the other thing is that the customer is getting smarter because there's software out there that can tell them the total cost of ownership relatively quickly. And they know that, at least I knew it, that if a forklift was down or a piece of machinery was down, I could tell you how much it cost me per shift, right? So I knew that if a forklift was down, that it cost me $16,000 per shift. And I was running a 3-shift operation. So $48,000 a day if that truck's not running, right? And so those things are, the customer's more aware of those things now, and so you have the OEM, the dealership has to understand that, right? And so the customer experience should be a core pillar in your strategy, right, for your business. I had an opportunity to work with a company out there. I'm not going to say their name, but they're a large company and they've grown significantly over the past few years. And I got an opportunity to meet their ownership. I could not believe the amount of customer service their team puts in for their customers. It was absolutely amazing. I mean, these guys would next day air you a motor if you needed it to their customer, right? That's pretty unusual. Not a lot of people do that, but they have built and doing things like that are a little bit out of the norm. They're costly, but they've gained a customer for life. The next time that customer buys 50 trucks, they're going to buy it from them, right? From that OEM. So it's, putting that customer experience, customer service level at the top of, your strategy is very, very important.
Yeah, no, 100%. I'd of course agree. With the changes with private equity, do you see it taking a similar trend to potentially the wider industrial services space or the HVAC space, where it becomes an industry with maybe 3 or 4 extremely dominant national players, like we've seen private equity consolidate in those particular industries?
Yeah, I think that the big guys are big, right? And so they're they've got deeper pockets, right? But what comes with that, and I've worked for a business where we were the number 2 spot or number 1 spot in our segment, right? And so when you're that large of a player, you're definitely not as agile, right? So you're very kind of rooted in your process, right? And so it becomes a lot harder to move. The ship is much bigger, right, to turn. So I think what you find is it'll take the larger guys longer to be able to adjust to the changing market, right? And the smaller guys can move faster, right? And then if you look at it from that standpoint, private equity is going to move even faster, right? And so are they going to push to move even faster? Um, so yeah, I think that is to me, I think I would call it the difference between traditional management, a traditional management style, and a more business or more contemporary business style, right? And so I think what you're finding is that the traditional business style is kind of starting to fall off a bit. It's starting to kind of take a back seat to the more contemporary leadership and business kind of optimization process. I think that's what you're starting to see.
Interesting point about moving towards a more contemporary style of business and not necessarily moving away, but the traditional model not being as prevalent within the industry. One thing that has stayed is the fact that it can be seen as an old boys club to a certain extent. It's a very male dominated industry. What has been your experience of this? What impact would more diverse leadership have on the industry, do you think?
Oh, I think I think it's incredible. Actually, I met a young lady who was entering, into the equipment space, and her first comment to me was, "This is really a male dominated. It's kind of like the good old boys club, right?" And so that's the way we would say it in America, right? And absolutely, it has been. But I think what's becoming more prevalent is this kind of different mindset, right? Not the traditional mindset. And so I think it's becoming adopted more. And I think, I'll be honest with you, once again, I'll go back to the private equity model, is that it doesn't care. It's going to pick the people who can perform and the people that can drive change. And I think it doesn't care, what you are, but you're 100% right. I think when I worked at a dealership is when my golf game was my absolute best, right? Spent a lot of time doing that, right? So you're right, but definitely new player, new ways of looking at things, and I think those more traditional business models need to adjust to that, right? They need to understand that's what's happening, and so I think as part of the success is you don't want to get left behind, right? So be comfortable with being uncomfortable is what I see, right? And so and I think the people that I've met, the young ladies I've met over the past couple of years that have been moving into the space have been very, very strong. Definitely, very detailed, very focused on what the goals are and things like that. So I think it's going to be a good mix. I think to have a lot of different types of players and a lot more diverse group coming into the space.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you mentioned before about private equity caring more so about the result than who's driving the result. How is it that you would go about, or what strategies can businesses begin to implement to attract the type of talent that will drive the results that, for example, private equity would typically be working for, or some of the OEMs who are looking to consolidate? How do you get those people in the business?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, as I mentioned before, I think today we live in a very transient workforce, right? So what I find is that kind of old mentality of throw them in the deep end and see if they swim. I think that is going out the window, right? That's not what people are looking for anymore, right? And that's the way I came into it. It's all the things that I've had to learn. I've sort of had to learn on my own as you go about your business. So, we talk about customer experience. I truly believe it's going to be about employee experience. I truly believe that. I think the people coming into the workforce these days, I think they want to make a difference, right? And they want to contribute. That's truly what I see. And not that it hasn't happened in the past, but I think you see that more. But they also want leadership. They want management to be engaged with them more. I do see that, right? And so they want somebody to invest in their future. And so I think that we have to take that approach going forward. So investing in training, investing in how we elevate those employees is going to start to be critical, because if they feel like you're not investing in them, they won't stay. If you're concerned or you're worried about investing in employees and then them leaving your organization, yeah, that's a different problem. It definitely is a cultural thing, right? Or it's a leadership issue. So I think you can't be afraid of it. And I think you have to stop talking about it and actually do it, right? So I was really leaning into trying to develop a LMS program, learning management system for internal employees, right? I think it helps employees to understand that we can help them level up, right? And we can help them to grow their professionally, right? Which I think it's critically important to me that we elevate and work to grow good leaders going forward. And I think that's a big part of it. And so I think when other people see that and that companies are engaged and organizations are taking an interest in them, I think it's easier to hold on to that. Now, I will say you have to set priorities, you have to set expectations and drive with purpose. So that'd be a level of accountability in that. But I think that's how you're going to attract good people into your organization.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. When you were developing that learning management system, what sort of qualities or what sort of things is it that you were trying to teach and develop within those individuals to make them be great leaders in today's market? What do you see as important there?
Yeah, I was really wanting to do it at every level, no matter what it was, right? I mean, if you think about the velocity at how, the velocity that you need to train somebody and bring somebody up to speed. And let me give you just a really quick example. Let's say you're hiring somebody in your accounting department, but it is, they're coming in and maybe they're working in accounts payable, right? Generally, the teams are lean, right? So you now have to take somebody off doing their regular job, right, their day job, and you have to have them train the new person coming in. So the training is, subpar at best, right? And so, you have to take those learning management systems and develop modules for everybody, right? And so this is going to give you, that speed that you're looking for to bring people up faster, right? And so you would take somebody like that and they would have all the steps necessary to learn their job in a modules that they could that quickly be able to accelerate and get caught up to speed, right? To do the role. We do it for technicians. Why not do it for everybody, in there? And then I think the other side of that is that your management team has to build good managers and good leaders. And so I think that's it. That's more of a question, I think, for ownership, right? And the C-suite team is really, do you have the right people in place in your management structure to be able to teach that to the employee, to be able to be able to elevate those people and teach them how to be good leaders and good managers going forward, right? And so, and you've really got to look at that, I think, as an owner. Do you have the right, correct people in place to kind of, create that step change in your organization?
In relation to upskilling individuals and the more transient workforce that is on the market today, do you find that there's less patience to be elevated with an organization after achievement? Because, for example, I speak to individuals in this industry day in, day out. That's all I do. Once they've achieved something significant and there isn't that recognition of it with a promotion, that's usually the prime time that they're speaking to us about looking for an organization to move to. How
Yeah.
is it that you balance that with tenure?
Yeah, I feel, I've got my sons are fairly young, right? And I think the microwave, it takes too long for them. And so my younger son will be like, I have to microwave this thing for a minute, and that's where we live, right? That's the reality of business today, right? And I joke that, people finish their 90 days and then they want to know when they're going to be the CEO, right, of the company. And I I don't focus in that area, right? What I try to do is get those people engaged and get them involved in collaborating and educating on the stuff that they don't know. And so, like, here's my path for you, right? This is where I see you going. Here's where I'd like to see you be. So create an outline or roadmap for them for their career, right? Here are the things that I find that you need to do or things that are necessary for you to level up to the next space, right? I think what at least what I've seen in the past few years, kind of post COVID, is that there's been an acceptable level of mediocrity to a degree that companies, kind of accepted, but now it's not as acceptable. People want to see results. They want to see action. They want to see drive, and I think that is changing the dynamic a bit, right? It's starting to, but are your managers to that level? Is your leadership to that level that they can teach those, younger people coming in those necessary skill sets? So one, I think you have to evaluate your management team first. Are they capable to do that? If not, you've got to get them trained or you've got to work with them to help develop them and level them up. And then I think, it'll help to then level the next group of people up. So that's kind of how I see it right now.
Yeah. Yeah, so not necessarily a promotion or a change rate related to an achievement, but they'll already have that type of pathway that they're looking at. So if I hit this milestone and this milestone, eventually I'm going to get into the seat that I'm looking for. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I can concur to the fact that I have plenty of people who are maybe even at the sales rep level giving me a call. They've had a great year. Next
Yeah.
stop president. It's not as feasible as you think it is. But to go back to the private equity side and related to consolidation, how do you think, or what advantages do you think that their involvement in the industry is going to have on scaling up the operations, professionalizing infrastructure, and improving the overall customer experience at the end of it?
Yeah, I think once again, it's going to be hard for some people. I think it'll be, especially if you're kind of stuck in that more traditional business model. I think it's going to be really a challenge. Private equity is going to move fast, right? It's a different set of stakeholders in the business, and so it's going to be much quicker, and it's going to be more focused on business optimization. So, right. So you're kind of fighting the entrepreneurial kind of approach, and that that business acceleration or optimization in the business. I think are two very very different things. If you're a smaller organization, how do you how do you manage that transition? It generally is very very hard for people that come from that entrepreneurial side or that very traditional. It's very hard to make that conversion. But you have to be careful because you'll get stuck behind it. I think what you're going to see is, and I went through this a few years back when I was working for an organization, and our entire market had been consolidated. We had at one point roughly about 400 different outlets that we sold to. And within about a 5-year period, it went to about 150. So it was pretty significant. The private equity came in, they bought up all the smaller, organizations, and so now your customer base has become much smaller. So it's kind of the 80/20 rule though. So it's become smaller. So is that necessarily a bad thing? It may have become smaller from a customer perspective, but you probably still have all the same outlets, right? So you might still have 100 outlets, but it's only 5 real customers, right? Kind of thing. So, but you have to look at the 80/20 rule. It's like, what's the 20% that make up 80% of your revenue? And it allows your team to become more focused and provide a better level of customer service. And so I think that is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just a different way to think, right? And so you're kind of getting rid of the noise. You still have the same volume or the same quantity, but it's just owned by less players. And so I think it is an opportunity for organizations to then focus on a smaller group, provide a better service, better product, better quality product on time. So yeah, I don't necessarily see it as a negative thing, but I will say that it's been my experience that in the private equity sector that it does move at a different velocity for sure.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And with the consolidation, and it's primarily amongst dealerships. Obviously, consolidating the dealership groups under one private equity banner would provide the OEMs with one point of contact to really push their product through. But there's risks associated with that. How do you think the OEMs themselves are going to react to the change in the market and the influx of private equity investors?
Yeah, I would say that private equity is going to be less tolerant. I mean, it's for them, it's a very simple, it's a very model: availability, quality, delivery. And really after that becomes really the support function, which would be critical, right? But really the first 3 items for OEMs are going to be really kind of focused on that availability, the quality and delivery piece. What you don't want, and I've seen this in the past, right, where a product will show up late, considerably late, right? And it happens in the equipment industry anyways. That just is kind of the nature of the beast, right? But then it shows up and a wheel falls off, right? That's what you don't want, right? Those are the kinds of things that you'd be very, very careful of. And so it becomes a lot more critical for the OEM to be able to provide a product that they can make some money on. So margin becomes critically important. So kind of leveraging their ability to optimize their operation to gain some margin expansion is going to be critical, but still at the same time delivering a good product on time and be able to support that product. So those become extremely important. The tolerance level is going to change a lot, I will tell you, because once again, the private equity side of the business, because they're focused on business optimization, they're expecting you to deliver that same way to improve your business optimization as well. So the tolerance is a little bit different. So people you probably increase the risk of potential losing customers where maybe in the past you wouldn't, because you would open that Rolodex and you would give your buddy a call, that guy you had a relationship for 25 years, and say, hey, this is what's happened. We're doing our best. That tolerance level starts to go away, quite a bit. You're going to have to, as an OEM, figure out how to deliver better. And I think that's going to be critical, I think, going forward. And so I think the challenge with that is, there's not a lot of us older guys left, have really deep backgrounds in the manufacturing operations environment. So it's important that you find those guys that can help to accelerate or scale your business, in the right way.
Yeah, absolutely. And just one question that we ask to everyone who comes on the podcast, Jeff. I'd be interested to hear what the most valuable piece of advice you've ever received across your career has been.
Wow. I would say this one, I had a somebody tell me years ago, and I think it really kind of changed the way that I did business was, um, embrace change. Yeah, embrace change. I think, embrace it. You have to feel comfortable with being uncomfortable. So I try to use that a lot, and I see challenges as opportunities, right? So it kind of changed the way I looked at things, right? I think it's allowed me to be more flexible and be able to adjust quickly and pivot to whatever is happening, because it's the reality of how we live, right? The change is going to happen no matter what, whether you like it or not. It will happen. And I think the most recent example, I think, from a business perspective, is the new administration coming into the U.S. and have changed the game. And so now you have to pivot, and you've got to now create a different strategy than you've been working on the previous years, right? And so those are the kinds of things I enjoy, right? So I really embrace it, and I enjoy it, and I don't mind being uncomfortable, right? So, but that's probably one of the biggest impacts that I've.
Yeah. Just out of interest, aside from the recent tariff situation and COVID, when has been a particular time in your career where it's been uncomfortable, but you've been able to rise to that occasion and really make the difference within a business?
Yeah, I've walked into a couple real challenges from a career perspective, when sometimes when you feel like you're walking into a growth situation, but you find out it's more of a rescue mission. And so when you're able to, and I've experienced this, right? And you're able to then leverage that. You have to be able to take that and go, okay, this is where we are. And you have to get way down in the weeds and find out, what are the gaps, and what are the challenges, and what are the pain points. I think I've had that happen quite a bit. I actually came into a company that was, I would say, very close to, probably shutting down some of its operations in the U.S. And we were able to turn that around in 18 months. We had completely, shifted the business. And it took a lot of rolling up our sleeves and really digging in with employees, bringing some new thinkers into the mix, and driving process change. And I think it took a lot of effort. It was 18 months of grinding it out, but that business is operating successfully, and it's got a lot of really good capital investments that are happening, and they're hitting all their customer targets, and so it's really good. That's probably one of the most challenging I've had, but one of the most rewarding ones that I've had experienced.
Yeah, I can imagine you can look back and just look at the number of jobs that you've saved and the number of careers that were maintained and then could be
Yeah,
accelerated into leaders just from that
sure.
18 months of change that you were able to make. But look, Jeff, that's all from us, and all I can do is thank you for coming on the podcast today. It's been absolutely fantastic speaking with you and getting your perspective on all these topics. I look forward to speaking to you again, hopefully.
Yeah, Luke, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Thanks for the time.
Wonderful. Cheers.
That was Conversations with CSG. I'm sure many professionals will relate and see value in the insights shared. Stay tuned for further insights from industry-leading professionals on our podcast, Conversations with CSG. Thanks for listening.